I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Welcome to another post-race discussion, this time looking at the race that took place at Istanbul Park. I think we had a real special one this weekend. Not just the race, but qualifying and free practice as well.
It was all great.
Drama. Yeah, it was full of drama and excitement. And it's nice to be back at this track. When we had our episode about the tracks we'd like to see in Formula One, we definitely mentioned this one because it is a very special place, very challenging. And then we were met with this bizarre resurfacing and the weather and everything, so we've got a lot to talk about. Before we get into that, we'll just have a quick move over to our view from the stands. We had a question from Dave Doherty, who asked us whether we preferred Monza or Istanbul this year. Now, obviously, we haven't really talked about Turkish Grand Prix yet, but what are you thinking, Shane? Monza or Istanbul?
Mine's a clear winner, and it's definitely Istanbul. Despite the race result being a little bit more unpredicting at Monza, Istanbul, I thought I was on the edge of my seat for the entire race. It was exactly what I want F1 to be. I know it can't happen all the time, but Istanbul was just thrilling from start to finish.
Yeah, this race certainly was consistently all the way through, and not just the race, but like the whole race weekend was something very special. So, yeah, I think I'd probably go with Istanbul as well. Thanks, Dave. Feel free to get in touch with your questions at RacePerMinute on Twitter or info@raceperminute.com.
Right, so moving on to the race itself, but before we get stuck into the lights out, let's talk about free practice and qualifying. So we turned up at Istanbul Park. It's been a handful of years, I believe 9 years since we last raced, and we were met with a challenging circuit. Not what everyone was expecting. I think everyone was expecting to go flat out, on Istanbul. They thought turns 8, 9, and 10, the four left-handers would be flat out easily, but they were met with a very slippery track. And that was due to the fact that the track was actually resurfaced 10 days before free practice 1. The reason behind that is Istanbul hasn't really been used that much for any types of racing at all over the last 5 or 6 years. So the track was showing some signs of wear and tear. It was a little bit bumpy. A couple of cracks were showing. Perfectly acceptable for Formula One, but the host decided that because they're coming back to Istanbul, they wanted to look amazing. So they put this fresh layer of tarmac on top. And I tell you what, from the helicopter cam, the track looked incredible. It was clean, crisp, tidy. It looked like a venue we'd been going to for the last 5 or 6 years. It looked like a proper racetrack, which we had kept on going to. Unfortunately, the drivers seemed to disagree. And I think it was free practice 1 when a couple of cars went out to begin with, and they were sliding all over the place. And it never really improved, did it? Free practice 1 was completely dry, and yet the lap times were slower than what we were doing 9 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with how long they had left it to dry or to treat, or however. I don't really know much about laying tarmac, so I can't really speak to the technicalities of it. But I understand that there's obviously lots of different ways and mixes and compounds that they can use, and presumably for Formula One, they probably use some kind of special one. Although there are also some street tracks that will use standard road tarmac as well. So I don't really know the technicalities of it, but certainly the freshness of it meant that it was like an ice rink, as a lot of drivers felt that it was. It did look nice, like you said. Obviously, that's the effect the hosts were going for. Yep. I understand they also use the track for sort of road safety testing and that sort of thing, but it hasn't really seen a whole lot of racing in recent years. So understandable they wanted to go for the resurface. And like you say, we were seeing times that were, 10 seconds slower or more than the laps that were being set in, 3 or 4 generations of Formula One ago. So it was definitely very, very difficult conditions out there.
It was indeed, and conditions didn't improve moving on to free practice 2. And I like to say, we don't usually talk about free practice on this podcast at all, because it's usually the, generic running 1, 2, and 3, and, the normal results. But free practice 2 started to rain a bit, and the cars found it even more slippery, which is obviously going to happen. But due to the rain, the oils and the grease were, come to the surface of the track. And cars found it even more difficult to stay on the track. Even the full wets and the intermediates were providing no grip whatsoever. And it was the start of things to come, really, wasn't it? That free practice 2 session, not many cars went out. I know Lewis and Bottas didn't actually do much running in free practice 2 because they weren't expecting it to continue that like it for the weekend. But actually, it was the start of things to come, and rain was a serious factor for this week.
And we obviously saw more of that in the race. I didn't really see any of the free practice stuff. So if there's anything that you want to, I don't know if there's anything you want to bring in about FP3.
Nope, it was also rain. It was a light drizzle in FP3, which was entertaining because that was when qualifying was due to, well, same day as qualifying, isn't it? So FP3 happened in the morning, qualifying a couple of hours afterwards. The track was wet during FP3, and we were graced with a wet qualifying session.
So this qualifying session, before we get into the quality of the results and how unpredictable it was, we need to talk a little bit about safety, because there's a few safety concerns this weekend for me.
Yes.
We saw cars not slowing down for double yellows in Q1, with the exception of Magnussen, who was very unhappy after the session because...
And rightly so. I don't mean to interrupt, but rightly so, because he killed his lap time significantly because there was double wave yellows, and not many other cars did.
Yeah. So like I was going to say, he was actually put in a good time and was knocked out as a result, even though he didn't slow down. So that the punishment needs to be severe enough to encourage people to actually follow the rules, because otherwise there's more of an incentive to break those rules when you know that the punishment is, probably not going to be as bad as not getting into the next qualifying session. So definitely some big question marks there over the safety, as well as there being a truck on track whilst they were recovering Latifi when there were green flag conditions shortly after. I believe the cars were sent out on track whilst there was a truck still recovering a car. So there's just a little bit of lax in the safety in qualifying.
Absolutely. And I vented that on Twitter, actually. There was a nice screenshot of Lando with a green light and the tractor in the background recovering Latifi's car. And a couple of you very kindly linked me to the race director's article as to why it was allowed to happen. And I think the assumption was that by the time the cars had got round to that part of the track, the recovery vehicle would be off the track and safely behind the barrier, which, is logical thinking. But, in my, I'm not a race director, but surely for the sake of 60 seconds or 90 seconds, why not wait for that tractor to be confirmed to be out of the way and then set the cars off? I know time was of the essence and it had stopped raining and we'd already had a red flag because of the rain. But actually, for the sake of 60 seconds, we're talking about people's lives here. Make sure that tractor's tucked away nice and safe so drivers aren't going to get injured. The recovery crew aren't going to get injured. It's just, it's something which shouldn't be happening in the sport, especially after recent years. There's no excuse. Why, don't chance it. Oh, it should be behind the safety line. It should be behind the barrier by the time the lap cars go through. No, just wait 60 seconds. Safety is of utmost importance, and I don't understand why it was chanced. It was unnecessary.
Yeah, so important that we point that out because we don't want to let the standards get slack. So yeah, hopefully that isn't allowed to happen again. Let's move on to the qualifying results itself then. So as we already mentioned, the sort of bottom five, Magnussen was very close to getting into Q2. But otherwise, kind of the similar suspects going out in Q1. As for Q2, both McLarens, pretty disappointing result for both of them, seeing as they eventually got penalties as well.
Yeah, it was a bad weekend for
both
them.
McLarens and both Ferraris out in Q2. Then the real surprises obviously came later on. The conditions started drying up. We saw people not sure whether they should be on wets, whether they should be on intermediates. And the end result was that we saw Lance Stroll take pole position at the Turkish Grand Prix, which is
that's
amazing.
Incredible stuff. I mean, fair play to him. We've, over the last couple of podcasts, we've turned around and said since COVID, since his little episode of his podium, he hasn't really shown up. Since he's been confirmed, he hasn't really put the performance in. But actually, credit where credit's due, he put it on pole position by, apart from Max Verstappen, by seconds. He was seconds faster than the rest of the grid, which is an incredible achievement. And I think fair play to him. He really shone through that qualifying session, kept it on the track. That Mercedes, that racing point was just, planted. It was exactly what the Mercedes should have been. But Racing Point did a lot better job of warming up those tyres.
Verstappen managing to get that time on full wets is pretty impressive as well.
Mm.
And
Verstappen was
Albon
very
did a good job.
disappointed, wasn't he? Albon did a very good job putting it in P4 behind Sergio Perez. Max Verstappen absolutely gutted that he didn't get pole position. He had been fastest in FP1, 2, 3, Q1 and Q2, and I think he boxed at the end of a good lap. He was a good couple of seconds ahead of the rest of the field. He boxed for a fresh set of tyres, couldn't get the heat in them, therefore didn't have the grip and didn't improve his time by as much as he should have done or as much as he wanted to. So actually, I think he felt like that was his pole position to lose, and he certainly did lose it, but Lance Stroll capitalised on it. Fantastic result. Well done, the Racing Point boys.
Yeah, and when was the last time we saw the Mercedes outside the top 5? I mean, they just didn't
not
feature,
this year,
did they?
Not this year, not last year. I can't even remember the last time they weren't on the front row, or like you said, the top 5. It's incredible stuff.
Yeah, both nowhere to be found in qualifying at the end. So that led us to a front row of Lance Stroll and Max Verstappen, which made for a very exciting start to the race itself.
Also, a shout out to Alfa Romeo for getting both their drivers into the top 10.
Yeah.
Again, brilliant stuff. Just played the strategy, played it well, kept it cool and under control. Other drivers didn't. So really, really impressive stuff this qualifying session in tricky conditions. And those conditions would obviously transfer over to the race the next day. So have you got anything else in qualifying? I think it was a really exciting qualifying. It basically set how this weekend was going to be. It was an exciting qualifying, which, if it was a normal race with no rain, it would have been an exciting race. But given what we had, we were set for a fantastic race, and that's what we had.
Yeah, so going to lights out then, we had one of the slowest starts I think I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen the cars crawl off the line so slowly. It was, I mean, obviously they're bigger and heavier and wider than they've ever been, so that probably accounts for some of it, and the conditions were particularly difficult. A terrible start for both Red Bulls. They did eventually recover, but neither of them really went off. We saw quite a few cars start in second gear, but they didn't.
Renaults did. So the Renault started in second gear, and
Ricciardo and Ocon did. Yeah,
both those got a fantastic start to the first corner. Their launch was fantastic. The two Renaults, they really jumped. They jumped a couple of cars, which was fantastic. And
Ocon had a really good start, but he was just ruined by Hamilton. Kind of went up on the inside of Ricciardo. Ricciardo had to react, and he just ended up tapping his teammate. It was kind of unfortunate, really.
Yeah.
And then Bottas, I think, seeing that incident, obviously tried to react to break it, gave it too much, and ended up spinning. And that was spin number 1 of 4 for Bottas today.
I'm glad you took note, because I've also got notes down how many times he's spun. It was a race to forget for the Finn, wasn't it?
It was an appalling race for Bottas. Appalling. When you consider how well his teammate did.
Oh, shocking. Absolutely shocking. But Hamilton got a good start, straight up to P3, capitalised on Max Verstappen, whose launch was okay, but then just had no traction going forward. Just complete. And we've seen this time and time again from the Red Bulls. I think a handful of times this year we've seen their launch being awful and just going backwards along the pit straight. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
And Bottas, go on.
Well, with Hamilton also ended up losing it halfway through lap 1, though. He had a lock-up about midway through the lap and lost a couple of places shortly after that. So uncharacteristic for Hamilton to make mistakes, but he had a few this weekend during the race.
He wasn't faultless at all. But I think every driver made mistakes. It's just how many mistakes and how you recover from those, and how much your mentality reacts to after these mistakes. So like you said, Hamilton goes wide, loses 3 places, and then drops down to P6 at the end of lap 1. And Vettel did the complete opposite. He was up 8 places by the end of lap 1. Absolutely fantastic. I like to see on the graphic at the start of the race, like who's dropped positions and who's made positions. Ironically, Bottas's wasn't as bad as I thought, because he started quite far back down the grid, and he only lost like 8 positions because he started P8.
He started 9th.
Started 9th, so he only didn't lose that many. But Vettel, fantastic start, kept it out of everyone's way, and just drove around people. It was a brilliant start, and that was the start of things to come for both Ferraris. Actually, reacted very well in these conditions.
Yeah, both cars look pretty comfortable. Obviously, if you've got quite a draggy car with a bit of a power output deficit, most tracks that'll be a problem. But when you're trying to keep your tyres at the right temperature, and you've got not a lot of grip, and you don't want to put too much power down, and you need a reasonable amount of drag to keep you on the track, I guess it worked for Ferrari this time. Both cars looked
Worked
pretty
very
good.
well, didn't it? Worked very well indeed. To
We had,
mention, sorry,
well,
I
we
was
had
gonna say
multiple
Bottas.
cars up on multiple places as well, because we had Sainz up 6 places. Both the
Mm.
Alpha Tauris were up quite a few places. I think Magnussen ended up getting up to about P10 at one point shortly after.
Yes, he was running in the points. Yep.
So yeah, quite a few cars managed to get up quite a few places at the start, which, like you say, it's good to see.
Bottas actually went wide halfway through lap 1 as well. Went off the track. I'm not sure if it was a full spin, but he did lose it, and that put him right at the back of the grid. Apart from Latifi, who might as well have not turned up this weekend. That was atrocious. I think he was lapped by just in starting the double digits of the lap numbers. He was a lap behind.
Yeah, he couldn't
But
really
lap
handle
one-
the conditions, could he?
No, not at all. And to be fair, brand new Formula One driver in that car, in conditions which most drivers had never seen in their racing careers on a freshly tarmacked surface. It was always going to be difficult, but just the difference, the reason these drivers are Formula One drivers is because they're the best in the world, so they need to adapt and overcome, and he didn't do any of those, which is a shame. On lap
both
2,
Racing
Max
Points,
closes.
though, I've just coming on to the end of lap 1, both cars for Racing Point were well away. Like they had nearly sort of 9-10 seconds in the lead by the end of lap 1. So they really got away really well. It was a strong start for Racing Point.
Yeah, looked very promising. And going on to lap 2, it was a little bit more of the normal order we expect, a little bit more of a queue, because the track was so slippery. Like people were trying to make overtakes, but they're only putting themselves in not danger, but putting themselves out of position by doing so. Max closes the gap to Vettel. Max had such good pace, right? This whole race, he was on it, and Max loves the rain. We've seen it time and time again. But Max closes the gap to Vettel, and but takes too much curb on the final sector, and he was really riding those curves. Whereas every other driver are trying to avoid these curves, because the last thing you want to do is put your foot down and get different traction amounts on your rear tires. So Max was proper attacking the curves. It was just strange to see, but by doing so, he almost loses it. Has a bit of a moment, and then Vettel gets away. And like you said, by the end of lap 3 going into lap 4, Stroll leads by 5 seconds. And that's to his teammate, who was leading by 4 seconds. So Racing Point, like you said, tremendous start. Absolutely fantastic stuff.
It seemed like theirs to lose, and that kind of continued the good vibes for them coming out of qualifying. But then what we saw is we saw teams starting to wonder about inters as the rain started to be, or the standing water was pushed away by people actually going around the track. And Leclerc, being the first one to gamble on lap 7, he was also the first one to gamble onto slicks later on, I believe. So Leclerc being very much the, the sort of the tester for the changing in tyres. So yeah, we started to see people thinking about pit stops, moving on to a different tyre. It was during that first period of the race, the first sort of 15 laps or so whilst that's going on, there wasn't loads of moving and shaking during that period. I think it was just people trying to get used to the conditions. We didn't see more overtakes and more drama until after that, I think. The only notable thing that I have around that period was just Magnussen being in the points around lap 11.
Yeah, I've got here on lap 8, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th place drivers set fastest lap consecutively. So that was a clear sign that obviously the wet tyres were doing their job, dispersing all the water off the track, and actually the track was getting faster, and we were slowly making moves into the intermediate stages of the race. And by this time, Leclerc had come out, done a couple of laps, and the intermediates were working well. They were matching the same time as the wets, which was only a positive thing because the track was getting clearer and clearer, and those tyres were becoming better and better, really. Vettel and Hamilton came into the pits on lap 9, basically followed each other in, which was always going to be the case. They were pretty much head to head. It was quite nice actually seeing those two drivers. They didn't really have many on track like battles, but actually you could tell that they were struggling to, they were chasing each other. Well, Lewis was chasing Vettel, which was great to see. It was really good to see Vettel up in the top 6 fighting for that position. And, as much as Hamilton's chasing him, Vettel's also got to defend. So they're coming off the racing line. They're defending well. Hamilton's going off the racing line to attack well. both those drivers didn't really do anything wrong in this stint of the race. Just kept it all together, and it made for some really good racing. I really enjoyed it, despite the fact they didn't really overtake each other. It was just made for some really good racing because those conditions you could see were tricky, and those two drivers were doing quite well. Speaking of which, we're looking at what drivers are doing well. Latifi on lap 8 was P20 and 35 seconds behind P19. So we didn't really see this on the world feed, but Latifi had spun a fair few times already in the opening 7 or 8 laps, which puts him 35 seconds behind P19. And I automatically assumed that, Latifi's box, clearly intermediates didn't work because both Williams started off on the intermediate tyres. Clearly they're not working. Maybe he's boxed for a full set of wets. But when that graphic came up, he hadn't boxed. And I was like, he's had a couple of offs then, because there's no other reason why you should be 35 seconds behind P19, which I think Bottas was P19, and he had just come into the pits or a fresh set of, for intermediate tyres. So that goes to show you how much Nicholas Latifi was struggling this race. It was a bad one for him. And on lap 10, Lance Stroll comes into the pits, takes the gamble. I think it was most drivers were a little bit reluctant to, because obviously by the time you'd done a couple of laps with the full wets, you've got temperature in, you've gotten used to how the tyres feel. You're almost getting into a little bit of a groove driving this track with this set of tyres. And then your team asks you to come in to put a fresh set of tyres on, which you have no previous data on in racing conditions. And you have no idea what the grip levels can be like. So a bit nerving. So like you said, lots of teams trying to juggle the wets, the inters, what to do with what driver, split strategies all over the place. It was really interesting the first couple of laps.
Yeah, and the punishment for not getting the right tyre at the right time in these conditions can be absolutely massive. So, yeah, very unsure what should be taken. So then we saw shortly after this pit stop period, Hamilton makes another mistake around lap 16, kind of in a similar area, which lets Albon past. And Albon showing some decent pace throughout this race. He wasn't really anywhere near Verstappen. I mean, like you already mentioned, Verstappen's pace in general was much better. But Albon, he didn't really disappoint. I thought that he had generally quite good pace. What let him down was his spin later on, whilst he was in P3.
Which you can't. I find it hard to criticise Albon in this race because he kept it in P3 for a long time, and he was right behind Max in P4 for a long time until Max spun. So thinking about the pressure, Max actually spun it twice in this race, going into turn 4, and then he had a humongous spin going through turn 12 and going off the racing line onto the curb, and then just spun it. I don't know how he saved that. I mean, Max has always been good at, if he's had a spin, he's always been fantastic at applying the brake in the right position, applying the throttle in the right position to keep the car facing the right way or on the track or out of the barrier. Any one of those will do. And he did it again this weekend. He spun at quite a high speed on a circuit which isn't as forgiving because the gravel traps were deep, and on the right-hand side of the track there was a barrier. Kept out the wall, kept it pointing in the right direction, and on he went. Obviously, he had to pit at that time. And, looking back on the race, Max boxing then wasn't actually the worst idea in the world, because we didn't notice at the time, but Inters were going to be the tyre to stick on for the rest of the race.
Yeah, Albon, can't really be faulted too much. I think he just kind of spun at the wrong place at the wrong time, really. It was kind of at a point where he wasn't going to get away with it as well. And Verstappen in general had the pace, but it was a 300th race to forget for Red Bull in general.
Yeah, it's a shame because both of them are running, quite close to the top. And it was a good showing for Alex this weekend. I was really rooting for him. In the back of my head, I had, Lewis in the championship. I had the 2 Ferraris thinking, actually, this would be really good if one of the Ferraris get on the podium. But equally, I thought, actually, if Alex gets on the podium, this would be fantastic for his confidence, for his seat for next year. And, lap 19, after Max did his spin and box, Alex had free air, and he was taking a second and a half out of the racing points in front of him, and it caught up within 4 or 5 laps. It was incredible. And at one point, he was only 3.5 seconds off P1. So as much as he's spun, and I know a lot of drivers spun this weekend, and at the end of the day, you've got to keep it on the track to win. I think he had a really good race. Obviously, he just fell off at the end, unfortunately. He was on the radio saying his front tyres are completely gone. It is what it is, but I thought he had a fantastic race.
All things considered, he did put in a reasonable performance. Certainly, enough
equaled
to get the team thinking about that seat and whether or not they might keep him in it.
It equaled Max's performance. I don't think Max performed any better than Albon, and vice versa.
Well, pace-wise, I think Verstappen was far superior, but
it
just wasn't really because at one point Verstappen had a spin. I think it was much later in the race, like lap 40 odd.
Yes,
and Verstappen had that spin after
and then
Raikkonen
caught back up.
And then he caught back up and passed him anyway. So
yeah, I'm not sure if that was orchestrated, that pass. I'm sure it was, but he did catch up quite quick, nevertheless.
Yeah.
Forgot to mention something very important. Lap 21, Bottas spins for the third time during the race, and drops to P17. And at this point, Lewis could have retired and still become, world champion. It was becoming, that was so far off. Like the thought of him not becoming world champion was so far off because I was so focused on this incredible race we had. It was just so fantastic. It was out of mind until the last lap, and I thought, blimey, this is happening. But like I said, Alex caught Perez. He closed the gap with 4 seconds in 3 laps, which I thought was really good before he had his off.
Yeah, Hamilton wasn't faultless either, though. He had quite a few moments where he had to back out of overtaking maneuvers and went a little bit wide, or he had a slip, or he had a lock up, but he still managed to maintain his pace despite those things. So yeah, Hamilton not completely flawless, but Bottas just too many big spins. And
oh man,
where did he even finish?
I can't remember.
I think it was like 15th or something. 14th he finished.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a weekend to forget for him, really.
And he was lapped as well, wasn't he? I'll put that down on my notes, which is
he was lapped by Hamilton later on, which was made it pretty clear what was going on.
So lap 28 happened, and we got confirmation from a couple of teams that there was no more rain expected for the Grand Prix. And that really changed the focus of the race. I think a lot of teams were holding out on the intermediate tyres because there might be some rain, there might not be some rain. Do we try and stick them out for another 10 laps and then go into to the end? Or do we hold out for dries? Neither of those happened for any particular reason. But I thought it was very interesting that on lap 28, there was no more rain expected. And then there was this almighty talk about slicks and dries. And actually, I don't think anyone went on to the dries towards the end of the race. But it was just crazy. And I think we should talk about how the intermediates played such a massive role in this race. They went from a wet weather tyre to actually, almost a slick tyre towards the end. And they were working really well in the already, lack of grip conditioned track. These intermediate tyres were providing such a good amount of grip for these drivers if they hadn't gone off if they didn't go off the dry line. So it was strange to see that the whole grid was running intermediate tyres, some of them with far more tread and being able to go off the line and, and race other drivers, and other drivers like Hamilton and Sergio Perez using these intermediate tyres, which are now bolded, turned into slicks and had to stick to the dry line. And to solidify things, DRS was then enabled on lap 30, which I thought was quite late because actually there wasn't much spray on the track from lap 10 onwards. So I think some of the commentators said that this was actually quite a late call, but actually given the nature of the DRS zone, which was turn 12, there's a little kink in the race circuit which Max had spun on. So maybe they were just holding off until that was a little bit drier.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I lost my notes on here. I'm just thinking that around that period of time, there was a lot of. I remember Stroll saying on the radio that they were frustrated with the graining and that the inters were really starting to wear down. And yeah, nobody really wanted to be the first people to go out onto slicks. But like you say, it kind of didn't matter because those inters ended up becoming slicks anyway. So
it was I've never seen that happen.
Hamilton's tyres at the end of the race, they were kind of scary to look at. It was like there was this completely flattened kind of groove. When you consider the way those inters start, it was quite incredible how slick and smooth they ended up being.
And clearly he had some worries because on the radio he was asking about not his tyre life, his performance. He obviously could judge himself how well the tyres were doing. But he was asking, are these tyres designed to go this long? And they're not going to explode on me. I can race these tyres, but they're not going to explode on me, which has obviously happened to Hamilton in Silverstone this year. And it happened to I think it was Vettel at Spa, actually, where the tyre exploded due to the length of last year in Spa, the length of time he used it. So clearly he had the pace and he knew what he wanted to do, but he just wanted to know the tyre would give that long, which I found very interesting.
Well, speaking of Stroll, his tyres, like we mentioned, start to disappear. He did end up pitting for new Inters about lap 36, 37.
Yep.
But this was the point I think Stroll lost his head a bit because he was getting very frustrated and the other cars behind him started really picking up the pace. And we saw the experienced drivers start rising to the front of the grid as we expected. The other cars behind him were setting faster laps, and he started fighting back against cars that were moving up on him after his pit stop, and it just wasn't working. I mean, there was a point where he tried to regain the position against Leclerc, but both Ferraris ended up going past him, and his whole lead just unraveled, basically.
Which is a shame.
His tyres were in trouble. It is a shame, given that he put such a good performance in unqualified, but because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to put in the pace in the race as well. And Perez was able to hold on to his P2, and he was in the same situation. So I think Stroll lost his head a little bit and just wasn't able to maintain the performance. He also may have tried too hard early on to try and build a big lead, whereas perhaps what they should have done is to just try and maintain a reasonable pace with both cars up front to protect their tyres. So, yeah, it all just fell apart for Stroll, and I think he ended up finishing 9th, didn't he?
He did, P9 for Stroll. But he was leading that race up till lap 36. Like, he was in a net P1.
Until his pit stop, yeah.
Yeah, until his pit stop. And I think he just did a really good job to keep his head calm, cool and collective up to that point. But like you said, he came out of that pits into traffic and then ended up fighting with cars who hadn't boxed but were faster. And I think he was pushing. He mentioned that his tyres had grained within the lap. I think at the same lap he came out, he was on the radio saying his tyres were graining. And then I think it just went all downhill from him then. Like, he was P1 for a long time and dropped down to P9, unfortunately. But that was the nature of this race. And this is what makes Formula 1 so exciting, because even the last 5 laps of this race, no one had any idea who was going to win. It was anyone's game. But we'll get on to that. Lap 40, I've got another note here. Bottas spins again.
Yeah.
And then comes into the pits for a fresh set of intermediate tyres. And I thought this time, I was speaking to my other half, and I thought, you know what? There's a big question mark around the soft tyres at the moment. There's a big question mark on whether not the dry tyres, sorry, whether they would work or whether they wouldn't. And I thought, you know what? What's he got to lose? At this point, he's P18, or he was back of the grid because we've had a couple of cars retire at this point. Why? I know why Mercedes didn't do it, because it was the unknown. There's no need to risk a multi-million-pound car going into when there's already a great deal of risk of that anyway. But I thought at least one team would have chanced it, because the difference between a wet set of tyres and a dry set of tyres, like they were saying on Sky F1, 10 seconds, 15 seconds a lap if you get it right. I thought, well, actually, he's at the back of the grid. He's not fighting for the championship because he's almost a lap down at this point. Well, he was a lap down from P1, not quite his teammate at this point. So why they didn't box him and put him onto soft tyres, I have no idea. I thought someone would have tried that, and I would have loved to have seen the results, to be honest.
I felt the same way towards Racing Point. I don't know why they didn't put Stroll on the slick tyres. Same with Ferrari. I think Vettel said after the race that they felt that the slick tyres, if they'd gambled it, might have been the difference between the result they got and maybe even winning the race. So I'm very surprised nobody went for that gamble, especially amongst the lower teams who were so far behind. Just give it a go. You get a bunch of data, but nobody wanted to go for it. So
especially a team
the conditions were so unknown.
Williams, they took a bold strategy at the start of the race. The only team to start on intermediate tyres, and it didn't work as well as expected. I think they were probably 5 or 6 laps too early. Everyone started switching around lap 8, 9 to 13, 14. Unfortunately, they were already on them. Russell was running P11 for a long time, and like in these conditions, in this type of race, anything can happen. He could have scored points, like I say every single weekend. But yeah, like you said, I would have been interested to see what would happen. So I'm surprised Williams didn't box Russell at this point and put him on the slicks, like you said, see what he could do, because he could have nabbed a point. Like, you never know.
Yeah, it's must have, obviously they knew something we didn't in regards to
Yeah.
wanting to make that decision.
I think
So,
every team was on the same line. Like, let's just keep everything going in the same direction. Let's not make any changes. It's working at the moment. It's working by a very fine margin at the moment. So while it is doing that, we'll keep it like that. But it would have been interesting to see.
Can we just talk about Verstappen being investigated for crossing the pit exit and then them saying that they're going to investigate it after the race? Which strikes me as a little bit unusual because there are so many cameras pointing at the track. They've got all this technology in place. They've got the onboards. Why do they need to investigate it after the race? I don't really understand that.
I have no idea. Again, I sat down and I said to my other half when I saw it on the screen, I was like, surely they just have to rewind the footage from the multiple cameras they have. Did he cross the line? Yes, equals penalty. No, equals no further action. There's no need to protest this after the race. It's a clear yes or no violation. It's not a, oh, he did, but he didn't mean to. It's a yes or a no. We've seen many drivers, cross the white line on pit exit and been hit with a slam dunk penalty. I don't understand why it wasn't today. I didn't actually see it myself. I don't think we ever saw it on the world feed. The replay of the incident is probably floating around on social media somewhere right now. But I can't understand. If it was an incident, yes, give him a penalty. If it wasn't, then no further action required. It seemed
the
like
nature of the race meant as well that Verstappen was in a position where he may have been quite adversely affected by an incoming penalty.
Yeah, he could have been in the top 3.
They should have just
and
got
then
on
been
with
demoted.
it. I don't understand why they couldn't. I don't understand it.
Absolutely. Given the there was so much potential in this race for stuff to go wrong, and yet they decided to leave that to be investigated after the race. I just don't understand. Like, something as simple as that should have been investigated there and then, under investigation, 5 laps later, either a yes or a no. It was ridiculous.
It was also around this time that we saw Sainz making places. He was going very, very quick, great race pace. He was past Stroll for P7 at one point, and then past Albon eventually for P6 around lap 45.
That happened on, exactly, lap 45. He passed Albon. Lap 46.
And McLaren did well to recover considering their starting positions. I mean, they were 15th and 16th at the start of this race. Sainz was up 6 places on the first lap. Norris eventually getting back into the points. I think he kind of barged past Russell a little bit on lap 27.
It was a little bit of a video game kind of pass, wasn't it?
I think he was struggling with enough grip. I mean, under normal circumstances, he would have had the traction to brake and make the move around. And I think he tried to make a move that was a little ambitious for the conditions, but didn't really see anything too wrong with it. There wasn't much else he could do.
Russell wasn't impressed, but you're never going to be if you're on the receiving end of that kind of overtake.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to be overtaken, do they? So
no, exactly. Lap 46. Now I want to talk about Lewis's pass on Bottas and how ill-orchestrated it was, especially as their teammate. So Lewis comes up to lap his teammate, going into turn 2, I believe, or going around that straight, uphill section. Bottas obviously gets a little bit out of shape going through turn 1, sticks on the racing line. Lewis close up quite a lot, but obviously he just gets caught up. He gets caught up in Bottas's mistake and then has to go off the racing line on a set of tyres which really shouldn't be going anywhere near the wet track at the moment, because at this point his tyres were pretty bold. And just to reiterate, Bottas had been shown blue flags for 3 laps as well by this point. And they were probably maintaining the same race, the same race pace over those 3 laps.
But you can only pass so many marshals posts before it's a penalty.
Yeah, and
so he must have been right on the edge there.
He was right on the cusp of getting a penalty, and it was such a poor overtake. You think with the 2 teammates come together on track and such clear-cut rules. It's not like they're fighting for position. It's I'm lapping you, please get out of the way. This is a rule which is in place. You would think he would have pulled over on the pit straight or just somewhere a little bit more convenient for Hamilton to get through. But no, it wasn't very convenient at all.
And shortly after, we saw another gain for McLaren and sort of compounding problem for Renault, who also had a rather unremarkable weekend. Ricciardo, this is about lap 49, had a bit of a spin whilst under pressure from Norris. At first, initially, I thought Norris had kind of tapped him going into it, but when I looked back on it, when they played the replay, when I saw that, it was just Ricciardo putting down a bit too much power.
Yeah.
Norris ends up inheriting P9.
It was a very good
And,
overtake.
Yeah, he did well. And he gets another one again. Stroll, who is sort of floundering. Norris had been putting in fastest lap after fastest lap. And I think he ended up with the fastest lap of the race eventually. He was just piling on the pressure on Stroll and ended up closing the gap enough to take the position and ended up P8. So, yeah, both McLarens did really well in the later stages of the race, especially when they started getting the on-track overtakes in. But considering where they started, when I saw the qualifying results, I was just like, well, I was hoping for a good race, but it's not going to be a good McLaren race. But it ended up much better than I expected.
It was a good race for them, to be fair. The later stages, it was like Carlos took it into his own hands in the first half of the race and decided to make all the positions up, and then Norris just took a little bit longer to get up to speed. But actually, like you said, the confidence grew with Norris, and he was putting in fastest lap after fastest lap, and made some really good overtakes. And it's not just about where you position the car. Obviously he forced Daniel into an error. Daniel Ricciardo, who's such an experienced driver, brilliant at overtaking, brilliant at defending, was forced into an error. And I thought, fair play to Norris. He stuck the car where it needed to go, forced Ricciardo wide without touching him, and then Ricciardo made a mistake. And, it's nothing to be embarrassed about at all. It was a good pass, and mistakes happen. I still can't wait for those two to be teammates next year. I'm really glad they didn't touch, because that would have soured the water ever so slightly. But I'm glad that, so like I said, I'm glad they didn't touch, but it was a good move. And then Max has obviously we talked on this later on. Max had another spin on lap 52 after, was it Kimi? It would have been Kimi because he was the only Alfa Romeo on the grid at the time. So Max reacts to Kimi's going off, and then Max spun. Albon takes position, but on the next lap, Red Bull switched position again, which is, like you said, incredible, because either Alex slowed down, which I don't think was the case, but Max clearly put his foot down and got back into the groove and caught up.
Yeah, Verstappen much more comfortable in these conditions in general. So, yeah, he was far better pace. It made perfect sense for Red Bull to let him go. We should also mention as well, just a team that we've barely talked about, that speaking of bad luck, Magnussen retired again for the 7th time this
That's really
season.
bad, isn't it? Yeah.
So, it's very unfortunate for Haas. Did it, I didn't quite catch it. Was it that because it was right at the end of the pit lane, was it possibly a wheel wasn't on properly?
But I think
they had
he
a
went
problem
back
with
out.
the pit stop?
So
Did he go back out eventually?
I think he went back out, because it was 3 or 4 laps later, and at this time I saw Magnussen was at the back of the grid, and I was like, oh, that's strange. It hasn't said that he's retired or he's in the pits. And he was on track, and then I think he retired. So it was
another poor race for Haas in general, who normally use these kind of conditions to play some kind of grand strategy. You'd think they'd be the ones to go on like softs at some point, see if they can do something with it.
And this is what irritates me. Like, we've had Germany last year when it was such a slippery race. We had all these teams doing split strategies, softs, medium, hards, inters, wets. It was anyone's game, and it was such a fantastic race. We have very similar conditions this year, and none of the teams which could really do scoring a point or two and have absolutely nothing to lose just didn't take that risk. I just don't understand. I don't understand. I will never know, but I really, really like to see at least one car on the soft, to see how much quicker they would have been if they got it to work. You don't know.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see somebody go for it. I thought at one point Leclerc was going to be the first one to gamble on slicks as well. I think
he came in quite late, didn't he?
They were going to do it. Did he not end up doing it then? I think he must have come back out again on inters.
I think the commentators thought that he was going to come in and go for slicks, but he came in and there was no live action shot of his pit stop. But he came out on intermediates, because I've had a little question mark after Leclerc pit.
Should have done it.
He should have done it. He should have done it, and it could have been the race win for him. It really could have been. Yeah. Given Ferrari's season, they could have taken that chance. This is what I mean. I don't mean to reiterate myself, but so many teams could have made that gamble, and it could have worked. That track was dry. Apart from the last part, that last corner in turn 1, that track was pretty much bone dry on the racing line, and it was becoming quite a thick racing line as well. So, again, really surprised. Maybe we'll find out in the future as to why no one did make that gamble.
Now, the action continued right to the very closing stages of the race, of course, with the last few laps. We saw, already mentioned, Norris ended up getting past Stroll eventually after closing that gap and took P8 around lap 56. And we had Hamilton, because there was some talk about from Bono and the team, they were talking about trying to get him to come into pit, and I think Hamilton overruled them.
He did.
Basically said, I hear what you're saying, but we should just stay out, basically.
The problem was it was forecast to heavy rain on the last 2 laps. And obviously Hamilton, who had built such a big lead on these bolded intermediate tyres, was quite comfortable. However, if it had rained, he would have been in a really bad situation. Equally, if he had come in and put a fresh set of intermediates on, the track was so dry that those intermediate tyres wouldn't have done him any favours. At this point, Bottas, who had just pitted for a set of intermediates on lap 48, was running 5 seconds a lap slower than the race leaders. So Hamilton couldn't afford to do that either. And I know he had the pit stop in the bank, but actually it was just the pit stop. So if he had come in, pitted, come out 6-7 seconds ahead of Sergio Perez, that sounds like a really cushiony barrier. But actually on intermediates, which probably weren't suited to that track at that time of the race, he would have lost 6-7 seconds a lap or over those 2 laps. So it was a really hard call to make. And this is where race experience comes in. We heard so many times throughout this race, drivers complain about tyres or drivers not coming into the pits or advising that they don't want to come to the pits. Lance Stroll, he said he didn't want to come into the pits, etc. And the team overruled him due to lack of experience. I like to see, and this is, it's very commendable, when Hamilton turns around and says, "No, I'm fine. I'm not coming into the pits." The team are like, you know what? This guy is on the edge of being a 7-time world champion. Maybe
we'll probably listen to him.
We'll probably listen to him. He's got nothing to lose. At that point, Mercedes had nothing to lose. Lewis could have retired on the penultimate lap and still become world champion. So Lewis, threw caution to the wind and thought, you know what? I've driven this car for the last 56 laps. I feel like I know what I'm doing. The cloud doesn't look like it's pouring down. I've only got 2 laps to go. I've got 6 miles to drive. I think I've got this. So,
the conditions meant that the state of his tyres being, nearly as bold as they were, was actually an advantage.
Perfect.
Like you say, putting on new inters would have been worse. So, Hamilton made absolutely the right call. I think even if he'd boxed and struggled, he might have lost a bit of time, but he was nearly 30 seconds in the lead when he crossed the line. It was absolutely unbelievable.
It was incredible considering he started 6th.
He started 6th, but also at one point was way down. He'd had multiple mistakes. Other cars had got past him. He didn't really look secure. Both Mercedes were struggling, but he didn't lose his head. He kept his cool, got his pace back, and he just put the foot down when he really needed to, and ends up in the lead of the race. And when DRS got reactivated, that obviously helped a certain amount as well. And the track was drying out. He has a lot of experience in these kind of conditions, and he knows how to make them work for him. And ended up with nearly 30-second lead at the end. That's why this guy is a 7-time world champion. I mean, that's why this is the case. You just couldn't. I wasn't even mad. I wasn't. Sometimes you're like, oh, it was going to be really exciting. It was going to be really unpredictable, and it still was.
He fought his way through. Yeah,
we still had an incredible podium and incredible results, but you just can't hold that against him. There is a reason why he is where he is. He did it in style. Yeah, he could have just come 8th or whatever. And scored, but that is not Lewis Hamilton. He was going to win the race, so he could.
I was really glad to see that he was on the podium, because at the start of the race, it was a possibility that he might become a 7-time world champion and not be on the podium. We've seen it before, and it almost feels a bit.
It's a bit deflating, isn't it?
It's a bit deflating. Oh, you know what? Congratulations, you've won the season, but can you just hold on 2 seconds while we celebrate these 3 drivers? They've won the moment. You've won the whole year.
Or it goes the other way, and you have them celebrating someone who's won the championship, and the 3 people on the podium are just kind of surplus to requirements.
Lewis won it once in Mexico, and there was so much. He had so much attention in Mexico. It was like the podium wasn't even a thing. But previous years where he's won it, it goes either way. But I'm glad he was on the podium. And what a podium
last season when Bottas won the race, but Hamilton won the championship, there was like a special little slot for Hamilton in front of it, where it was like, this is for the world champion. And everyone was like, yeah, Bottas, you won the race, but nobody cares.
Yeah.
It was a bit, it just felt a bit harsh.
Yeah. It's always nice to see the winning the championship on the podium. It goes so much better. Exactly. And like you said, Hamilton's won a lot of races this year, but you think
he's won 10 races this year.
10 races, it's crazy.
This is his 10th victory.
That's incredible. And sometimes we're like, it's a little bit boring. Mercedes dominance again. Nah, fair play to him. Kept it on the track, made mistakes, kept his head most importantly, and drove to success. Those tyres were ridiculous towards the end. There's a very skilled driver.
There's absolutely nothing boring about the way Hamilton dominated today.
Such
nothing
a good
boring
race.
about that.
Yeah. If every race was like, if you could fight for the race win, like I said, like 3 or 4 laps towards the end. Yes, Hamilton had a 30-second lead, but his tyres were so bad. Like, and with the threat of rain, I said to Hannah, I was like, he might still bin this. It's not impossible. Hamilton stuck it in the barrier multiple times before, and it could happen again, and he could still win the World Championship by doing it. It was, it just feels, it's such a positive, I just loved it. It was such a good race, such a good race.
And he was very emotional about it afterwards as well.
I was emotional about it.
It means a lot to him, and it was a very, very special moment. Equals the Schumacher record. What more is there to say? Like, he does it in style.
But we're not quite there yet. We're not quite
not even at the end of the race yet.
We're not even at the end of the race yet. So I actually stopped taking notes on lap 53 because I was just so engrossed. But so Hamilton, we done talk about the final lap?
We've got the very closing bits now where Perez, who we should say has held on to that P2 rock solidly throughout the whole race.
Incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty big statement, isn't it? A man who's without a drive next season. That's a serious statement.
Yes,
so Perez, fantastic drive to
and
hold
took
on
it to both the Red Bulls as well. Like stuck it to both the Red Bull drivers, which only highlights his profile, which is a fantastic thing. So Hamilton crosses the line. It did worry me when he does his normal thing when he comes off the racing line and goes down to the pit wall and starts like celebrating. I was like, dude, don't stack it. Stay on the dry stuff. But yeah, Hamilton crosses the line. Perez crosses the line 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
And then take it away, Alex. Take us through those last couple of corners.
Well, we have Leclerc, who's been pushing in on Perez this whole time. Really good pace. We already mentioned how comfortable both Ferraris looked in these conditions. There's a little bit of fighting going on with him and Vettel as well, as Vettel is pretty close. He goes for this move on Perez into the penultimate corner and just bungles it, basically. He just doesn't quite get the line that he needs and ends up losing the podium position to Sebastian Vettel on the very last corner, who ends up back on the podium again for the first time since, it must be since his win in Singapore, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And I'll tell you what, I'm not even mad. I couldn't have predicted such a better podium. Oh, Leclerc was furious.
He was very angry on the radio.
To see Vettel on the podium again, with the year he's had and the criticism everyone's given him, I was so happy. And what a nicer guy to be on the podium with Hamilton as well. Those two have so much respect for each other. On that podium, there was 13 world championships between Vettel, Hamilton, and Perez. 13. What a bunch of drivers.
You mean 11?
Yeah, 11. I don't know why I said 13.
7 and 4, yeah.
Yep. I don't know why I
was
going to
say, how many world championships has Perez got?
Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, actually. That's a bit embarrassing.
But you're right. It was a really nice podium to see Vettel there, and the two of them together. Obviously, they have a lot of history, and Vettel giving a nice sort of congratulations towards Hamilton and told him that he was rightly so making history. And Vettel, very, very tough season. Good to see him up on the podium.
Could be his last time on the podium.
He did well in the conditions. I don't think, because Vettel actually lost the place to Leclerc on track around lap 40 odd.
Yeah, he did.
So overall, Vettel's pace wasn't outstanding. He didn't make loads of overtakes, but as we've said multiple times before, sometimes you've got to just leave it on the track and do what you've got to do. Stay on the racing line. Yeah. To finish first you must finish, all that sort of stuff. And that's what Vettel did.
Leclerc went for that move. It didn't pay off, and he lost a position for it. That's the difference between the podium positions and not. If Vettel was in that position, would he have gone for that move? Potentially not. Each driver would react differently, but the fact is, Vettel didn't try and overtake. He thought, fourth place is probably going to be my best this year. I'll stick at fourth, and all of a sudden he becomes third, and we get this fantastic podium celebration. It was just magical. And honestly, I just can't get over how good this race was.
And that was a real turn up for the books as a race of unpredictability, seeing as it's a team we've seemed to have spoken about a lot in previous races. Almost nothing to say about AlphaTauri this weekend. They just did not feature. I think they had to start from the back of the grid. Gasly had to start from the back, didn't he?
Yeah, they finished 12th and 13th.
Yeah, so not even in the points for them. They'd both been lapped. Just not a whole lot to say about their performances. Again, you'd think that'd be a team where they might gamble on slicks and see if they can make something of it, especially someone like, especially someone like Gasly, who we've seen in tricky conditions on softs, has been able to, maintain the quality in his tyre. But again, we don't have access to all the data or what the teams are seeing, so there must be some reason why they decided not to do it. It was still pretty treacherous in some parts of the track, so they must have decided not to for reasons we're not aware of. But yeah, AlphaTauri, we've spoken about them so much. We've spoken so much about Gasly. They just did almost nothing this weekend, it seems. We certainly didn't see much of them.
No, not at all. Which was, like you said, which was a shame, because actually a team which has taken opportunity before, but they've taken the opportunity around of it. They weren't really anywhere near this weekend. They just didn't really turn up.
So this is a race of what might have been for Racing Point, really. We started off with the first Canadian to take pole position in Formula One, not called Villeneuve, ever. And Stroll with his first career pole. You got the Racing Points ready to take the fight. They were out in the lead. They were 10 seconds plus in the lead. It looked like theirs for the taking.
They had 20 laps to go.
Was able to hold on.
20 laps to go. They were in the lead for 37 laps. 1-2 or 1-3. It was a great start for that team. And it just went downhill from there on out. Well, for one of them, but still a great job for Perez.
I hope that it's still... Yeah, I hope that it's still a confidence boost for Stroll nonetheless, though, because until he kind of lost his head a bit, and I do think that that's the main reason. Like, he just wasn't able to put in the performance. Like Perez, he was able to hold on to that second place. He's in the same car. So yeah, I still think, however, that it should be a confidence boost for Stroll. He did really well to get that pole position. And until the tyres started to fall off and he lost his way a bit, he was generally setting good pace. So hopefully this means that that he'll come back and can prove some of his more vocal critics wrong.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Right, let's move on to our driver of the day and championship standings. A driver of the day is a tough one this week because it feels like almost any driver who managed to keep it on the track deserves driver of the day.
Very true.
And there's so many great drives to talk about here. We have, not least of all, Lewis Hamilton, to go from where he did to get the win, to be 30 seconds in the lead. That alone is pretty incredible. Sebastian Vettel as well, from 11th on the grid to get onto the podium. And Sergio Perez holding on to that second place. Lots of really good performances. My driver of the day, though, is Carlos Sainz. Up 6 places on lap 1. A lot of on-track overtakes. He got past Stroll, he got past Albon. He managed to... I don't think he made a mistake the entire race. I mean, he was pretty much flawless all the way through. I certainly didn't see one from him. He had the pace to take it to the cars that were in front of him, and he managed to hold on to his tyres. He didn't seem to be struggling. Started from 15th, ended up 5th in a period where McLaren had really struggled during the earlier parts of the race weekend and are in an extremely feisty battle for third place in the Constructors' Championship. Yeah, it's a brilliant performance for Carlos Sainz from me. I think shout out to the other drivers, but Sainz had the consistency.
I completely agree. However, my driver of the day is Lewis Hamilton.
Fair enough.
For obvious reasons. I'm not going to go through every single reason. I think we've highlighted them in this podcast. Really good drive, kept cool, calm, and collective. Did what needed to be done. And I think it just highlights to why he's now a 7-time world champion. In a machinery which was struggling in qualifying and struggling in free practice, you match him to his teammate and he lapped him. It's crazy. They're in identical cars and he managed to pull out a 30-second lead to P2, lapped his teammate who finished, over a lap behind him. There's something about that guy. It just works. On bold tyres towards the end of the race. And you could arguably say that Sergio Perez deserved it as well, because he did exactly the same thing.
But he had a mega stint as well, didn't he?
He did have a huge stint. But I'm going to stick with Lewis Hamilton just for this race. He doesn't get driver of the day very often because he's he's so good. But we mentioned that he would have to get P1 in practice, qualifying, and the race, and the fastest lap. Well, actually, he only got P1 in the race this week. But I still think it was well deserved. Probably a one-off driver of the day for me, because he's always so good and above average. Well, he's just so good. He's not above average. He's fantastic.
When the standard is so high every week, then it's
exactly. So I feel like if there's any opportunity,
so.
there's going to be any opportunity to give Lewis Hamilton driver of the day, it's going to be today because he started in P6 and won the race by 30 seconds. That is a good race anyway, let alone the conditions he had to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And and on the flip side, we saw people like Verstappen and Bottas and other people who might be taking driver of the day at a different race who were just at best decidedly average.
Yeah, it was
just not really bringing it together at all. But yeah, I agree. Lewis Hamilton, very special performance for him today.
Bottas has got a lot to answer for this week.
Yeah, it's just not very good at all. I mean, we know that they were struggling, but to spin not that many times and to just be absolutely nowhere and to get lapped by your teammate, yeah, it's emblematic of the way that this championship has gone.
Mm.
Now, looking at the constructors, that battle for P3 has sort of changed a little bit, but not much, because we see that Racing Point hold on to their P3 for now, a few points extra thanks to Perez's second place. But McLaren now pulling away from Renault with 149. Renault's 136. So that's still exciting. But Ferrari, with their finish, with their P3 and P4, they now jump
in it.
AlphaTauri, or they not jump them, sorry, but they push ahead of AlphaTauri that little bit more and are now very much in the fight for P3. So
yeah, only 24 points behind P3. And that's a good race. We've still got 3 races left, and this order will jump around quite a lot, I imagine. We've got 2 races at Bahrain.
Mercedes now have more than double the number of points than Red Bull. It's unbelievable.
It is crazy, isn't it? It's just a testament to how well that car's done this year and how well that team has built that car and all that. They work together so well. But like I said, 24 points separate P3 all the way down to Ferrari in P6. It's anyone's game. We've got 2 races at Bahrain. We've got the Bahrain circuit and we've got the Bahrain outer ring, which I can't wait for. It's going to be rapid, that track. There'll be no risk of rain there. And then we're going off to Abu Dhabi for the final race of the season.
Never mind.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it? But that Mercedes points, there's still so many points left on the table. That could be 600 by the end of the year. You never know.
Yeah.
It's theoretically possible. But Bottas needs to step up if it's going to happen.
Williams still yet to score. Will they get a point?
I really hope so.
The year is out.
I really hope so. But moving on to the driver standings, obviously all wrapped up now with Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion.
110 points in the lead.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's ridiculous with 3 races to go. That could be a lot more. You never know. That could be, a 150-point lead by the end of the season if he continues his current form. Bottas sat on 197, didn't pick up any points today, which is a little bit worrying considering Max Verstappen finished, he's on 170 points. So actually Max is only 27 points behind Bottas now with 3 races to go.
Mm-hmm.
It would be unlikely, I think, if none of those drivers DNF, I think Bottas will still clinch P2 in the championship. But you never say never. Bottas, Max Verstappen is right there, right behind him.
And Perez, now in 4th as well, hitting 100 points. Again, it seems strange to think that this is a guy without a drive next year.
Next year, yeah.
Again, he's making a statement with his position. Both McLarens sort of a bit further down the order in 7th and 8th. Albon just behind in 9th. He's on 70 points now, so 100 points behind his teammate Alexander Albon.
Well, that's the same difference.
Got some work to do.
That's the same difference between Lewis and Bottas. 100 to 110. It's a big old gap, and we give Albon a lot of criticism. I mean, equally, I give Bottas a lot of criticism. They're both behind their respective teammates, and it's not close at all, is it? It's quite bad.
But then again, there's also the way that points are handled out in Formula One, in that the higher the places, you do get that big fat 25 points for the win.
Yeah.
And that is the way that it should be. I think that it is fairer the way that the points work now, because there's got to be a really big boom.
It's got to be an incentive,
for getting those higher positions, hasn't there? So it does make sense. Sometimes that can exacerbate the points difference between teammates a little bit, but But yeah, you're right. It is the same points difference between the two Mercedes drivers and the two Red Bull drivers. It's just that with the two Mercedes drivers, they're still first and second in the championship, despite that.
Both
But
McLaren
Max
drivers.
Verstappen, do you think Verstappen
on.
is likely to hold on to it, like hold on to P3? I think it's unlikely that he'll jump Bottas, isn't it?
I don't know. If Bottas
Unless he can
has
get a
another
win
weekend,
in somewhere.
if Bottas has another weekend like he does this week, like it's not out of the question. Like I don't know. He's got to turn it around. I'm sure we'll find out in the week coming that why Bottas had such a bad race and what worked for him and what didn't work for him. But yeah, I think we're lucky that Max didn't finish too far ahead. Like, I don't know where Max finished. Have you got that? P6?
He was 6, I believe. They were 6th and 7th.
So yeah, if Max had finished any higher, that gap would be a lot smaller. Luckily, he only picked up a couple of points. But, if Max had finished 3rd or 4th, that gap would be really small between him and 2nd place. And I think it would be anyone's game. But I think Bottas will keep hold of it unless he DNFs for any reason. I don't know. But interestingly, both McLarens are only 1 point aside each other. 75 and 74 for both of those drivers, which is really good for them, to be fair. Like, they've had such a good season, sat in 7th and 8th.
Norris obviously had a very strong start with his podium at the beginning, and since then, Sainz has been pushing back. He had a podium himself, and has been getting back up into the points. Norris has been a bit unlucky in places, but the McLarens as the two drivers together have been more consistent as a unit, so hopefully they can continue that forward. And I'm still hoping they can nab that 3rd position, which would have been unthinkable last season. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, they fingers crossed for them to take that 3rd place.
Right, guys, so that wraps up this week's podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to us and give us a like. And if you've got any comments, then pop them down below. If you're listening to us on audio only, so on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, please be sure to give us a rating and a review. Really helps us out. We get a little bit excited when we see it pop up. 2 or 3 reviews is all we're getting at the moment, but it's good stuff. If you want to interact with us, follow us on Twitter at RacePerMinute. We're constantly on there. Both Alex and I are constantly looking for the latest news, the latest gossip. We don't really promote gossip, but we like to see what's going on. But what we do is reply to most of your comments. So keep them coming in. We love the interaction, and give us a follow. If you want to get in contact with us and have your question answered on the show, you can either tweet us or you can email us at info@raceperminute.com. And if you want to video yourself and send it to us in an email, we can play your video on the podcast and react to it live. So that'd be quite cool. And if you really like the podcast, you can support us on Patreon for as little as £1 a month. And that's at patreon.com/RacePerMinute.
Thanks very much for joining us.
See you next time.